don't build somebody else's personal definition of success, right? Somebody else, some VC or society. Figure out what brings you joy and do that, because it'll be too late sometimes, right? Business and everything is great, but we're always chasing unicorns, and we know what's happened. The media perpetuated this addiction to unicorn porn in the last couple of years, and now it's a graveyard in many senses.
Get ready for the ProducTea with Leah, your fun-sized dose of business, tech, growth, and product chatter. I'm your host, Leah, and it's time to spill the tea. Top of the hyper-growth morning. All right, folks, get ready for a roller coaster of resilience, inspiration, and hard-earned success. A survivor of the Gulf War, almost met the Grim Reaper due to COVID, wrestled with the demons of depression, and still came out on top? Yeah, that's him. Now, how many people can claim to bootstrap their company to a whooping 8 figures and then raise 100 million? With a staggering 120,000 subscribers and some seriously impressive engagement stats, he's not only a wizard in the startup world, having boosted Boast AI to an eye-watering 10 million ARR, but he's also a podcast regular. With features on giants like SaaStr and Marketing School, he just does not get tired of sharing. He does not shut up. But instead of chilling on the beach, he's still hustling, he's inspiring, and he's making waves. From the Gulf War refugee to tech tycoon, turning challenges into triumphant stories and ensuring the journey goes on and on and on and on, as his new book suggests, from grassroots to absolute greatness. My friend, Lloyed Lobo, how are you doing this morning?
I am excited, and you bring out the energy you give out. That's such a great intro. It's probably the best intro I ever had. Thank you for putting love in everything you do, including my intro. Now I have to match your energy and bring that to the table for your audience.
This is really great to hear, because normally I ask, how would you rate this intro? But you already did this. So can you maybe introduce yourself to the fools that may not know you?
Definitely. So when people ask me this, I go all the way back, because I like to bring my vulnerable self, right? I spent my childhood summers as a kid in the slums of Mumbai, and my fondest memories as a child are from this community. That was my first love, my first connection with community. My mom grew up in the slums of India, and she had 9 siblings, and every time I'd go there, puddles would turn into ponds. Watching TV was a communal activity. Eating was a communal activity. So that was my experience with community. As life progressed a few years later, I wake up one morning and my mom says, "You can't go to school anymore. The Gulf War has hit." As someone who would study last minute for his exams, I had studied for a math exam and showed up for a geography exam. So I knew I was going to fail 4th grade. And when my mom wakes me up that morning, I'm like, yes, you're never going to find out I failed. When reality started to sink in, I saw worry on their faces. That day when I went down the building with my dad, I see a lot of worried faces. Now, unlike 2023, where bad news just perpetuates and we belabor so much on the problem, people were just immediately coming together to form solutions. Okay, I'll guard the building from 6 to 12. I'll guard the building from 12 to 6. I'll organize food supplies. Hey, I have family members displaced. Guess what? I'll give them some shelter. Every building became a sub-community, and word of mouth spread from one community to the next, to the next, to the next, and turned into the largest grassroots evacuation movement that talked to embassies, that communicated with countries, and rescued us to safety. And what I recognized was the value of having a big purpose that day, is because a small kid like me who was 9 years old or 8 years old, I felt so connected to that purpose that in whatever little that I did alongside my dad was speckle of an effort that we did, I felt like I was driving that big purpose. That day, it taught me more than community. It taught me about the power of people that can drive massive impact and change worlds, but it also taught me about entrepreneurship. We all associate entrepreneurship with making lots of money, but the entrepreneurial spirit is nothing other than turning an obscure idea into execution and world-changing impact while dealing with extreme risk, uncertainty, and ambiguity. And that was my experience with extreme risk, uncertainty, and ambiguity. I mean, nothing worse than that, right? You're in the middle of a war. You don't know if you're going to live or die. There was a time there were no cell phones. There was no internet. Phone lines that were on the wire were cut. So it was extreme, extreme uncertainty. Fast forward a few years, we immigrated to Canada. I finished engineering, and that's a story in its own. I mean, I finagled my way into engineering. I don't have a high school diploma. The first job I took was in cold calling. What had happened was I was through that journey, I was craving this risk and uncertainty, and it just wasn't sitting with me that I finish engineering and go and take a job with a tech company coding. And so I asked entrepreneurs, what's the best skill I could learn? And they said, sales is everything. But I'm like, to learn sales, I got to communicate. And so, based on advice, I put myself in a situation that would force me to communicate day in, day out, day in, day out. And that was cold calling. And from there on, my career progressed from cold calling to being a salesperson to running GTM and then doing startups. It was that spark of, hey, how do I turn an obscure idea into impact while dealing with uncertainty is what drove me. Now, what's really funny is when I took that first cold calling job, my parents absolutely lost it. Like, our friends' kids who finished engineering, they're at Microsoft. You're making $30,000 slamming the phones. Come on. But fast forward today, I'm everything I am because of that one skill, learning to communicate, right? From convincing your wife for 10 years that someday a startup you do is going to work out. So she's going to have to pay the bills, to convincing early customers, to convincing your employees that this is the vision and this is how you have to roll, to convincing investors, to convincing the media, is all communication. And there's nothing better to teach you how to communicate like that than selling. Put yourself in a situation where you're forced to polish your messaging on the fly, negotiate, pivot, and change course. And when you're on the phones, you're required to do that day in, day out. And, everything great is on the other side of risk, uncertainty, pain, and also consistency. I mean, taking risk and pain and not getting better is not going to lead anywhere, right? And you won't get better until you're consistent. So that was my journey to entrepreneurship in a few minutes.
That is a really impressive story because it does not really, I think it is easy to claim a couple of things, right? So, like, also in terms of the adversities that we faced in life. And I'm not saying that people are playing this stuff up and so forth, but I did not know you at all a couple of weeks ago. I think it was about 3 or 3 weeks ago when we actually met for the first time in a call. I know that you've written a couple of times about some bout of depression and the stuff that you went through on LinkedIn, and you have a very clear writing style about all of this, but you also have kind of borders that I kind of, like, you're very clever about the writing that you do. And we were talking about trust quite a lot in another recording and how to build this. The interesting bit for me was that when we met the first time to just talk, and originally this was planned as just like the pre-talk for a podcast episode, I think something like this, we started to talk about so much more. It was not about the particularities of like the Substack or your origin story or the things that you pushed through. Like, all of this was also quite relevant, but like this was about, hey, look how I'm doing this. And then you were like, oh my God, look how I'm doing this. Like, I have this book, and I was talking about the Substack and everything. The passion that you put into your stuff is very remarkable. And I already know that after a couple of weeks, if I was an early stage investor into people, and I'm not saying that you're in any way in an early stage, but like in kind of my life you are, then I sometimes know that an investment is worth it, like the social investment, the investment of energy. And I had this feeling with you relatively quick, because I can say without a shadow of a doubt that you are an extremely hard worker. You are someone that works quite a lot, even though sometimes, the tears are coming down the face and you just have to push through. You just get up for yourself every morning and you push through it. And we were talking about this quite a lot, but like this particular bias for consistency, I would call it that, is something that I love in people and that I really admire. And I think this is a really beautiful kind of basis for getting anywhere in life. Because not everything has to be connected with financial success or like making it big in business or whatever. This can also be just about how you nurture relationships with people. Because as long as things are easy, they're easy to manage. It's how you handle the tough times in that regard. So you are an inspiring person, and I was really pumped for this episode as well. We already recorded another one some other time. But yeah, I cannot wait to see now where this goes. And I hope that people also see now a little bit on the journeys that you are embarking on and also capture a little bit of that spark that you gracefully showed me.
I'm honored. I mean, those are really, really nice and warm words. And sometimes people just say words, but for the audience's benefit, we had an interview scheduled with Leah on my podcast, and it ended up being almost 2 hours. And that just shows that we had such great camaraderie that you invested the time, right? I think trust is a cornerstone of all relationships, and we established that when we talked early on a few weeks ago, and now that has progressed so fast from me just being a follower of you, you being a follower of me, from an audience to then us coming together and becoming a small tight knit circle.
Yeah, I think you're misjudging that I could just not shut up. And that's why sometimes things take just 2 hours with me. It's just what it is. No, but I appreciate it. So let me just maybe ask the first personal question to you. It's my favorite question to everyone here on the podcast. What do people get wrong about you once they get to know you?
I come from a lot of high energy, and I'm also a bit of a jokester. So I'm always playing pranks, trolling people. That's my way of showing, bringing my vulnerable self. If you don't bring your vulnerable self into an equation, it's hard to build trust quickly, right? So, one of the key reasons why relationships fall apart in personal life and business is an absence of trust. And trust involves vulnerability. When people feel safe to share their thoughts, admit mistakes, they are able to ask for help without fearing negative consequences. And I find that the best way for me to enable people to be honest and share the absolute truth is by doing that myself, by bringing my vulnerable self first. If I don't bring my vulnerable self first and admit my mistakes or share my dysfunctions, then others won't do the same, right? Like in tech in Silicon Valley, we have this notion that everyone is crushing it. And then one day they're crushed, their business is crushed, they have depression, they've left town, they've passed away. I've seen this happen time and time again. And so my nature has always been, especially as a community builder, a community person at heart from childhood, is to bring my vulnerable self. So that means I overshare. I joke and fool around a lot. I say dumb, silly things without thinking. And that has haunted me all through my life because people just automatically think I'm a dumbass, right? Until they know me.
No.
And a lot of people, especially people in certain positions or people who look at worlds very differently. So there's two definitions of success in life. There's one that you believe. What is my personal definition of success? And there's a society's notion of success. The way I behave is against society's notion of success, right? I wear this hat. I got 2 slits in my eyebrow. I wear a earring. I wear baggy pants. I've rolled this way all through my career, right? For the most. And so I wear a hat on the podcast, on the YouTubes. And when I talk, I always bring my vulnerable self. I never say, like, start with, I'm crushing it. I talk about mental health. I talk about battling depression. I talk about losing a child. I talk about all of these things. I joke around. I fool around. So when you do that, people don't take you seriously or they just think you're an idiot. And it's not all the people, it's maybe a small portion of the people. But a small portion of the people who judge you that way sometimes also have a tendency to chastise you to make it worse, right? For example, I'll share one vulnerable story that actually drove me. And I can say this for certain that a lot of people who have had any amount of success are driven by similar things, right? In interviewing so many people for the podcast, talking to thousands of leaders, the most successful ones are driven by a burning anger or spite to change the status quo, to prove the naysayers wrong, to take something that was incorrect and make it right. And what had happened in 2008 was I walked through that journey of a cold caller. After cold calling, I moved to New Jersey to be with my girlfriend, now wife. And I moved from Canada. I was in Canada going to university. I took the first job in cold calling in Canada. Then she was studying medicine in New Jersey and she didn't want to move. Great decision, by the way, because US doctors are paid more and she paid our bills till I had a good outcome. But I moved there and I got a job working for a startup. And I took the job in sales because it was a natural progression, cold calling to sales. When I landed there, it ended up being, hey, talk to customers and figure out what to build, wireframe it, and write it up and tell the developers now what to build. And then, oh, by the way, you need to learn everything about marketing because you need to launch the website and everything. Now, most people would say, I didn't sign up for this. So they'll quit. I wasn't getting paid much. The job then was paying me $50,000. Even for that time standard, it was low. But I was on a visa and I wanted to be with this girl. And it was the best decision ever because I'm everything I am because of her support in my life, right? And I went through the motions of like, hey, I need to communicate. I need to wireframe because I studied a bachelor's in software engineering. So those two skills I had. Now I needed to learn everything else, sales, marketing at a deeper level, right? Now, eventually, although that startup had good growth and revenue, we're selling to big customers like Armani, Simon and Schuster. It was the best learning I could ever have because I was working alongside the founder in many ways, right? And when you work alongside the founder, you're beyond you. When you work alongside a founder where there's no repeatable, scalable model for anything, you learn a lot because you're creating the frameworks. Nonetheless, what happened was the 2008 crisis happened and the company ended up laying off a lot of people, going out of business or selling assets. And I was to get married in 2008, December 27th in India. My heritage, my wife's heritage are Indian. Now, coupled with Lloyd is now unemployed, with me being this bumbling idiot, like always joking, trolling, and having this vibe of, they took me to be this non-serious person, right? So now I'm coming from this person who's always kidding around, messing around, joking around, coupled with he finagled his way into engineering, doesn't have a master's, the company shut down. 2 days before before the wedding, my wedding was called off. Okay. And we had so many people there. And the only thing conveyed to my parents was your son will amount to nothing. Like this guy, no well-meaning parent would allow their daughter to get married to your son. He will amount to nothing. And, my mom stayed at home all her life to look after us. And she felt like, hey, she didn't raise us right. And my mom only asked me one thing, Lloyd, is she right about you? Is she right that my upbringing wasn't correct? That one statement and seeing my mom cry drove me literally all my life. And I'll tell you the sequence of things. I only ever worked at startups because I knew the only way to hit an outsized return is to work at a startup. We did Boast, which did well, but in parallel to Boast did Automatically, which was a chatbot built on top of Zendesk in 2015. That ended up shuttering. I joined the founding team of a company called Speakeasy, which was an AI-based sales assistant tied around the call. That had raised $6 million, worked out of Bessemer's office. They incubated the company. That failed. Then also in parallel, did an events company because we were good at hosting events. And I said, okay, you know what, this will make some money. And the third co-founder ran away with $250,000 in profits. We had to sue him. By the time he paid us, nothing came by, but persevered. And finally, we sold a majority, 52% of Boast to a growth equity firm, and we did well while still owning, because we had bootstrapped Boast after seeing how venture-funded startups are zero-sum games. We got lucky, right? And a growth equity firm bought 52 some odd percent of the company. Me and my co-founder still maintained nearly 40%, moved to the board, but that was a good outcome. Now, I could have stopped there because that outcome hit society's definition of success. I saw more money than my family, either side of the family, my wife's family or my family ever saw. But that didn't stop there, right? So what happened was after that incident and I left the day-to-day of the company, I ended up getting depressed. I hit rock bottom. I became an insufferable character and I started just calling friends randomly. Hey, I'm going to come see you. Let's go party. And they're like, dude, we have work. I'm like, I don't care. I'm paying for flights, hotel. We went to so many places, maybe Dominican to like France to Romania, everywhere. And things came to a head when I was in Romania at a conference, Techsylvania, and there was a after conference speaker retreat in the boonies, like 4 hours from Bucharest. And at 2 a.m, I'm dialing for an Uber, frantically dialing for an Uber. And all the speakers, there's a bunch of speakers from Silicon Valley. They're like, what the hell are you doing? Just sit in the pool and enjoy. And the Uber doesn't show. The organizers are like, no Uber is going to show. Mysteriously, the Uber shows up, and I pull my bags and I book a flight to Costa Rica, and I tell everyone, guys, I have some friends in Costa Rica, I'm leaving. That's how I hit rock bottom. And then I realized the only time in my life I hit rock bottom, like even through the wedding being called off, I didn't, was when I felt I lost my community, right? Because from the slums to the Gulf War to then building Boast with a community-led model, I always had the community. And then finally, I found a community around fitness, which is the Peloton community and some fit friends, and that community made me better. And so what I was saying is that spite drove me, and despite having that outcome, I didn't feel successful. And I said, you know what? The community has always saved me. As an homage to the community, I'm going to write a book. But the book, outside of giving back to the community that's always given me, because even the investors who bought the company came from our community. They literally came to an event and converted to buying the company. But the success wasn't sitting with me, right? You came into money. I wrote this book for my mom to tell her that the people who told you that your son will amount to nothing because he doesn't have a master's degree, he's not society's definition of success, wrote a book that the world will read. And so my goal is to make this book, From Grassroots to Greatness, a bestseller and give the hard copy V1 with bestseller on it to my mom. So that was the spite that drove me. Now people ask me, are you going to build another company? When's the next company? And I'm like, I'm so happy, man. Although San Francisco is home base, I moved to Dubai and I'm chilling here with happy people, a great community. And I say happy people don't drive change. You got to be really angry and passionate to drive change. Happy people don't drive change. So, that this was me bringing my vulnerable self. So it's better to bring a connection and see the true side. The other side of entrepreneurship is we have this definition of success, which is money, money, money. But ultimately, money doesn't bring happiness, Leah. Like if it doesn't provide for what money buys, like, money should buy you freedom or whatever it is. You have to write down what my personal definition of success is. What is going to bring me joy? For most people, it's I'm going to do this at 65. What is that you're going to do at 65? Because at 65, you might not be able to do it at 100%, right? You won't be as functional. So what is that you're looking for money to bring you, the joy? Find that joy and find it now. Because what happened was, Leah, after we did the deal, I had spent no time with family that year or for a long time. Business was first. Business was number one. Community was number one. But my first community, my kids, my wife, I had ignored. And I told them, listen, we'll spend time together after the deal is through. And my wife's like, listen, nobody cares about that. We care about spending phones down with you at dinner at least. The compound interest on that consistency for that is huge. And I said, no, let the deal go through. I'll take everyone to Bora Bora. The deal went through, booked everyone to Bora Bora. 2 days before Bora Bora, I got bilateral COVID pneumonia and almost died. I was in the hospital. I promised my family that I would come back and spend more time with them, because as I was crying in the hospital, I said, if I could change back one thing. Now here I am, like I've made money. None of that matters, right? It's not the money in your bank. It's the people around your tombstone that matter. And if I died, my regret would be I didn't spend enough time with the kids. Nonetheless, I came out from the hospital. And like Boast at this time was 30, 40-ish people, right? It was a small company that had bootstrapped to 10. We were doing more with less. Now this company over 6 months went to like 120 or so people over 6-8 months. By August, we were like over 100 people. And it's chaos, right? I was a 0 to 1 guy. See, every company needs to have a person that stabilizes the company. My co-founder, Alex, is the CEO. And a person that injects risk in the business. And I was that. Founder, president, he was founder, CEO. So I was injecting new risk, meaning every time it's like the newest project I would take. New products, new markets, new tech, new channels. I was our first SDR. I signed our first clients. I designed the first wireframes. I built the community. Like do the initial things that are risk and then hand it over. It was so much fun, right? Because I was a team of one in a way that collaborated with everyone. And now all of a sudden I find myself in a situation where we hired so many people and they're like, oh, Lloyd, you're a single point of failure. You run marketing also, product is also you, partnerships is also you, community is also you. So we're going to find a CMO and we're going to find a CPO and we're going to find all these roles. So when that time now I've come into this chaos, right, from the hospital a few weeks later, And I'm seeing, okay, we've hired all these people. And I was part of that hiring. We hired some very big company execs. And I felt like we went from being the pirates to all of a
Yeah.
sudden the Navy. There was no in between. Like we went from being pirates and then boom, next thing you know, you're Navy. So few months roll around and I'm not gelling with these execs. It's obviously it's not my jam, right? I'm used to like being this like you are, like a solo creator at heart, right? Like to drive everything myself. I was editing videos myself and doing all this stuff. Now some of those things needed to be outsourced. Like you don't want to be editing videos, right? You don't want to be a super individual contributor. You want to graduate as a founder from an IC to a manager to a VP. But at the same time, some of the things I felt like, you know what? It's not my jam. And I was at loggerheads with the execs. In that time, we were at an offsite and I missed 20 calls from my wife's friend. And I pick up the phone and she's like, "You're an asshole. You did this for the third time. Your wife's gone into labor and there's no sign of you." Right. And so we were in Austin now, not in SF, for an offsite. And I had to hop on the next flight, which was the following morning. And I barely made it to see within an hour, my third kid came. Right. And this was the case every time my child was being born. I was doing some post company stuff. A few weeks later, in a board meeting, I'm like, you got to fire all these execs. Right. Board is like, listen, you've been through a lot of stress. Why don't you take a paternity leave and we'll figure it out. Right. That day I went home and I hugged my wife and I literally cried and I said, "I'm sorry for all the times that you needed me and I wasn't there. I put the company first. Today, the company is at a scale where I'm not needed, but you're the only person standing." And so I bring these stories as a way to convey that don't build somebody else's personal definition of success, right? Somebody else, some VC or society. Figure out what brings you joy and do that, because it'll be too late sometimes, right? Business and everything is great,
Yeah.
but we're always chasing unicorns, and we know what's happened. The media perpetuated this addiction to unicorn porn in the last couple of years, and now it's a graveyard in many senses.
I feel like one of the main issues that, and there's a lot of good points that you actually just made, but like one of the main issues that people have, I think, with themselves is that they sometimes get this view where they don't treat themselves as their best friend. And I mean this in the sense that when you were deciding that something else was more important, it was a very conscious decision, right? So, like, would you drop everything if your best friend would land in the hospital and you would drive there? Yeah, you absolutely would. Right. So, like, it's always like a decision between what you do and what you do not do. And I can relate very hard to what happens if life is taking away something from you for good forever, because this starts to happen in our age. It can also happen to us, right? So, like, we're both over 40. I hope that's not confidential knowledge, but like, we figured this one out. And my father is not doing very well right now, right? So, like, it's just a question of time until this will be out forever. And every day that I still have left is going to be one of the very few days that are possibly left. There's no second do over, there's no third do over. Your wife is only in labor with her third child for once, with the second one either, and with the first one as well. And I do ask myself sometimes whether you have to be broken in some way to be successful in this particular industry, because as you said, like, you put consistency into it, you have to put some drive into it. But I do resonate with the thought that some of the stuff comes from a dark place. At least that's what it was also from my side, right? So, like, something that you feel like is not right. And for myself, it was waking up one day and just having the sinking feeling of, oh my God, I wasted my life. And for me, it was more like the thought of like this growth mindset that I could not step out of myself. I could not really admit that I was wrong about anything, because just like you, my mom also had a big influence on my life. But like, I always felt that my surroundings told me that I'm not worthy enough. I'm just not worthy enough with what I do. So what did I do? I started to pretend that I am, but that gives me not the fulfillment. And it's the same with money and fame and all of these kind of things. There's a very specific reason why a lot of people who are famous, and I know how that feels now in a very confined kind of setting, why it does never live up to the hype. Because no matter how many times people come to you on a conference or anywhere else on the outside and just praise your stuff to the wazoo and back, it does not replace a real relationship with a friend that is there for you when you actually need them. And I feel like This is very, very hard to explain to people who have never been through it because you need to also kind of experience it a little bit. So I do appreciate the message from you, but I also know that when I was absolutely zero successful in any of these spaces, that I would not have believed it. So it's sometimes something that you also kind of need to experience. And I find that particular part extremely difficult. But nevertheless, I think sharing these personal stories is extremely important. But I think we kind of made our bed a little bit also in this industry. So the thing that you said about Silicon Valley, how many senior leaders from the really big companies do you know that would stand in front of their staff and say, like, guys, I fucked up. Here's how I did it, and here's why, to the very, very personal level. It took me quite some time also as an executive coach now. And, like I'm looking back to 4 startups and so forth. We struggle every week. None of this is easy because if it was easy, it would not be, someone else would have done it already. And that's the thing. It will always be hard. It has to be hard. That's the point of it.
Everything worth doing is hard, and everything great is on the other side of hard and pain and risk and suffering. That's
No.
unfortunately the way life goes. You might get lucky once in a while, like, I don't know, people want to say Instagram was lucky, that happened in a year, but you don't know what suffering they went through. You never know somebody's journey until you're in it. But everything great is on the other side of pain, suffering, risk, and hard, right? But the reality is, if you don't do those things, you'll never build something great. You'll never be on that journey in many ways, right? So you see Mr. Beast now, he's an icon. You got to see his first pieces of content. They were awful, but he kept doing it and doing it. And then he didn't stop, right? Not only did he not stop, but when he made a lot of money, what would be the easy thing to do, Leah? Would be, I buy a private jet, I buy a Lamborghini, I live in, I don't know, wherever I want to live. I can live on Mars if I wanted to, right?
No.
Short of that. But he didn't, right? He cured 1,000 blind people. He donated money everywhere. He built community, forget community. He built a movement and he became an iconic brand. He became a cult like phenomenon. He's raised 20 million to plant 20 million trees. He's raised 30 million to pull out 30 million pounds of plastic from the ocean. If you don't do the hard things, if you don't stand out, if you don't be a little eccentric, you blend in with the rest. And if you blend in the rest with the rest, you're just like everyone else, right? There's status quo, and then there is the great folks, right? And everyone who's
No.
gone on this journey from grassroots to greatness has gone on the other side of difficult.
So I find this quite interesting because if you just take it into a more or like less romantic kind of context in terms of tech startups and the way that we're building business, sometimes we just think about, well, B2B business is just like B2B business, right? It's dry. We just talk about technological topics. And then sometimes also like the stuff that I just said, like leaders being leaders, like everybody is just always very, very professional. Salespeople only go out with ties and with their shoots and everything. But I feel like what's been happening in the last couple of years is that everything gets much, much more personal. We also start to wake up to the fact that everything is driven by community. We start to have acquisition there and so forth. So a lot of this kind of honest reflection on how business life is, like as an entrepreneur, as a founder, is that, well, these founders that are becoming successful become also your clients now all of a sudden, right? So, like, there is in some ways, this is not just like people pouring out their heart, but it also becomes kind of like a thing because you need to be authentic. You need to be authentic with who you are as a leader, because also when VCs, I'm not sure whether you are doing any investment, but what people oftentimes do not really realize is that when you start to invest into companies, one of the first slides that you're going to check is the people who are running it. That is a far bigger predictor than some of the key metrics that we have in certain businesses. Because if you do not believe that someone can actually pull the company through because there's going to be a lot of roadblocks, then you're not going to invest. And this is one of the key factors that is going to happen. And these people and the culture that they run is also like almost like a mini community. And I love this quote from Ravi Mehta so much, like when he said that, look, culture in a company, which is kind of like your microcosmos, all right? So like your micro community. Culture in a company is what people do when they don't know anymore what to do. And that's ultimately what it comes down to also when you're building your own community. It doesn't matter whether it's on a personal level or whether it's like something that you and me are doing, like paying for our lifestyles or whatever it is, or like whether we just want to amass more people. In the end, what it comes down to is you create this really uncopyable culture around yourself, around your community that in some way works. And I cannot tell you how it works in detail. I know some of the mechanics on making it work, but that's what makes it so beautiful because you can remove me, but you cannot put someone else in and then it works in the same way. It makes it hard to sell as a business, but right. So, like, I'm becoming irreplaceable for my own community. And that also makes it quite a beautiful thing, in my opinion.
I think one of the key things to scaling that is codifying that culture, right? And when you codify it and you drive alignment around it from the initial people, then it proliferates towards everybody, right? And then you go from one to many. And so when I was looking at all these companies and even our journey at Boast, one of the key things, in terms of building community, key things before you even take one step forward is to understand, do you have the values internally to build a community driven company? And what does that mean? That means the DNA of giving. Do you care to give value and potentially not see a return for a while? Do you draw joy from helping others become successful beyond your product or service? And there were some key things I found that were common traits of a community led company is they care to drive connection, right? Connection is everything. They give people the autonomy. If you try to control people, it won't grow. It won't be a community. They want to help people get better and better at their craft, right? Become better and better versions of themselves, mastery. There's a sense of purpose that is much greater than the product or service. They infuse energy into the environment. Like I said, your community is a marathon of the heart and mind. It's a labor of love. For people to sustain and keep going, there needs to be energy. Otherwise, everything feels like work. They infuse energy. And the last one is recognition. No matter how big or small work someone does, you proactively recognize them for their efforts and they keep coming back. And I called it the camper framework: connection, autonomy, mastery, purpose, energy, recognition. If you have these values in your community, in your company, people will be happy campers, as cheesy as it sounds, but you need to be proactive in that. How do you drive connection? Now, the rails of all of this effectively is communication, right? If you don't communicate, what is the job of a leader? Is to build, inspire, and motivate people to deliver. Deliver always is the output of the equation, is the lagging indicator. Because if you treat your people with love and help them grow, they'll treat your business with love and your business will grow. So that's why build, inspire, and motivate people. But what is the rails of that, right? The rails of that is common to communities, common to relationships, everything is communication. Your job then as a leader becomes that I need to clearly articulate the vision to excite, inspire, and energize people. And you got to do this day in, day out. It's not like a one and done activity. When people are energized and excited, they can move mountains. And that's how some of the biggest movements were formed. And so you got to start there is, what are the values, right? Do I even embody the values of a community led business? What is the purpose of the company that transcends profits and a product? What is our vision, right? And this purpose need to not only transcend the product and the profits of the company, but the purpose needs to be a forever thing. Like, you may die and go, if but that purpose lives on, right? We talked about, hey, I've become indispensable, but what some of these most enduring brands have is they have a purpose that is a forever. And then there is a vision of what the world will be as a result of the existence of that company or that community. And there's a mission, is like, how do we behave? Like, what do we do basically? And then there are the values, which I talked about, the camper values, is how do we show up every waking moment? And I think that is the starting point of how you build a community-led business or a community in general, is understanding those values, understanding yourself, and understanding the values, and understanding the purpose. Because if you don't have that, then eventually you'll burn out. There are going to be days where you make no money.
Yep. That is exactly what it is. And what I usually like to do, because I 100% have now some people that are, they're thinking like, yeah, like that sounds nice. It sounds a little bit disconnected from ground truth and, like however reality is and so forth. But there's a very sound economic argument around this that you can actually drive and make sure. So the way that we structure companies nowadays is we try to disconnect the kind of monetary discussion, which is still the purpose of most companies. I'll give you that. Of course, it is there to kind of generate money, which is the currency to do anything. Whether you're using this for good or bad is besides the point. But let's take the most monetary incentivized position in a company that you can have, which is sales. Every salesperson is obviously money driven and so forth. If you are living in a market that is commoditized, so people have choice, so there's 10 solutions for the particular problem that you have, and this is now becoming a very much reality. Like if you look at the martech landscape map, you see there's like 9,000 tools, 20,000 tools just for marketing problems that are out there. What is the main quality that you need to have in a VP of anything? Like for instance, a VP of sales. You want them to bring other people in who are really good at closing. And who is best at closing? It's those salespeople that love solving problems for their customers. It's not like the scary guys, like the typical sales guys from the used car dealer shop, like that tries to talk you into a bad deal. Because the matter of the fact is, regardless whether you're selling your product over a sales driven motion, or whether you do it over the product led growth, or whether you do it over community led growth, the end is you will lose in terms of efficiency, monetary efficiency per dollar that you invest into your business. You would lose to someone that actually loves what they do, because they will do a better job on the bad days, and you cannot compensate with this with more money. Because the moment you start to spend money on this, you start to become inefficient, and then you're going to lose out on your position. And this is why salespeople who love solving problems also love products that are genuinely good, because that makes their job easier, because then they actually solve problems for others. And this is why this entire thing kind of comes together. And we sometimes joke and we say that people who love your product become salespeople for you. That's kind of what it is.
Your customers become your evangelists when they love your product and they love your purpose and you're helping them, right? That's why I say fall in love with your customer and make them successful beyond your product or service. So Bo's journey, right? My co-founder Alex and I were partners in every project in university, and he has a great background of engineering and then studied accounting and a unique background that took him into the world of R&D funding. Globally, hundreds of billions of dollars are given by governments to give businesses who innovate for innovation funding, for tax credits, and so on, to basically help drive innovation in those countries: US, Canada, UK, Australia, France, you name it. Most of the Commonwealth countries have it. And it's hundreds of billions of dollars. The US government gives, I think, over 10 billion. Canadian government gives 3 some odd billion. But the problem is the application process is cumbersome. It's prone to frustrating audits, and receiving the money takes a long time. And so Alex called me one fine morning and he said, "Hey, I want to do a business in this." And I just jumped at the opportunity to work with him because we were so close. In university, he was always the guy who built the stuff. I was always the guy who sold the stuff. So that was the relationship. Even our undergrad degree project was on collision avoidance on real-time vehicles, and he coded the project and I was doing the presentation. We had good tuning. And what had happened was I was working at a company and I was now running GTM. So I'd progressed from being cold caller to salesperson to, I don't know what you call it, like sales meets product, like a person that did everything, to now running GTM. And the co-founder of the company or founder of the company, was like this person who had a lot of pressure from investors. And this is key. It's very important to align with investors. If you don't align with investors, you're going to get a lot of pressure. And they were always like, grow, 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 grow. And there were a bunch of kinks. And he was relaying that pressure on his employees, right? Like it all flows downhill, right? The stone rolls downhill. So I would be in the office till 9, 10 every night. And one week I started going home at 6. And he messaged me after this third day of me going home at 6 saying, "Hey, I used to love it when you're in the office till 9, 10. You have no family or anyone around here, and your wife works 100 hours a week because she's in residency in med school. So what's causing you to go home?" And my heart sank that day. And I was going home because my parents were visiting. They didn't live in the States. They don't live in the States. They live in Canada. And I hadn't seen them in a while. But that day when I go home, like I'm all stressed out. Imagine your boss says this, right? You're like, already I'm working till 9, 10, and I go home for 3 days and I get this email. And it's harder as it is working for a CEO, right? Working directly with the CEO at an early stage company. And Alex calls me that day and I just said, hey, as long as we can build the company we want to work for, I'm in. And so that was the journey. Now, Alex was in Calgary, I was in San Francisco. So I moved there temporarily. And, talk about customer love, right? We started our journey by cold calling everyone, cold calling manufacturers and oil and gas companies and construction companies to buy this, right? And what they're hearing on the other line is two guys who've never heard of saying, hey, give me your data and I'll get you money from the government. I'm like, oh, it sounds scammy. Or, oh, I heard of this, but my big four accounting firm does this. So why should I work with you? So we kept getting rejections. We started going to like oil and gas events, manufacturing events, construction events, and we just couldn't resonate. Didn't feel like our tribe. Then we started hitting up all the startup events there, and we felt like it's our tribe. We were like, wow, we can have these conversations because we were two founders, right? Meeting other founders. But very quickly after going to those events, realized that all the talks at the time, this was 2012, was high level CEO platitudes. It wasn't helpful. Some conversations at like 50,000 foot. And I'm like, these are great to inspire somebody to go into entrepreneurship, but it's not great if I want to get my first customers or close an enterprise deal or figure out like, what feature should my first product have? Now, because as a function of us being around startups before, me being in Silicon Valley, I'm like, hey, we have some access. So let's start hosting our own meetups for this community. It resonates, definitely resonates. We're not getting any luck in the manufacturing and oil and gas, but this feels like our tribe. And we can have the conversations, right? It's a community we are starting to love. We participated in hackathons like Startup Weekend, and we were having a great time. So we're like, let's do something for this community. And it was a time where, nobody in 2012 was wanting to service startups. So when we started targeting the startup market, all our competitors would be like, dude, why are you going after this market? In 6 months, I guarantee you, there's not going to be any boast. You guys are going to go bankrupt. Startups never pay. That's why we don't target them. So one way to win is to bet on a large market and be contrarian about it and actually be right. Because fast forward 2023, all these people are fighting over each other to start startup programs, but we've been building the community since then. And so we started hosting our own meetups because we were like, let's solve for us. We want to know how to do this, get our first customers, build the first product, yada, yada. We'll call somebody who's not at level 50. We're at 0 or 1. We'll call somebody who's at level 3 to 5. They'll be able to talk tactically about how they got from 0 or 1 to 5. And that's not going to be a high level platitude. It's going to be more relevant for us. And so the first meetup we hosted, 10 people showed up and our email went from being buy my stuff to say, hey, Leah, we're bringing the founder of this company at 5 million in revenue. And he's going to talk about how they got their first 5 million in revenue and how they landed their first big investor. Do you want to come? There's going to be pizza. It was at the co-working space, so the venue was free. Pizza was like for 10 people, $20 at the time, or probably even less. They had this $9.99 deals. The next time we did the event, more people showed up. More people showed up. More people showed up. More people showed up. One day we had 200 people show up at a co-working space. We had some speakers come from Silicon Valley. And the guys who ran the co-working space, now we're hijacking the aisles of the co-working space. Yeah. The guys who ran the co-working space are like, listen, you can't do this. Like, this is a conference now you're running with 200 people. Like 200 people in a small town in 2012 was a big event.
No.
And in parallel to this, the other thing I found was that nobody was supporting startups at the time. Even the local newspapers, blogs were not covering startups. So we said, why don't we start writing about startups? Our website was fairly new. So we're like, if we start blogging on our site, we're not going to get any freaking social proof. Forget social proof. We're not going to get any SEO. It's going to take 2 years to get SEO. So we started reaching out to the local newspaper and saying, hey, give us a column, give us a column. And they're like, who are you? Like, get out of there. We don't even, like, this startup thing is not even our jam, right? It's not content we cover. And I kept like saying, like, look at Silicon Valley. Like, I'm from there. Like, it's exploding because TechCrunch and the media covers it. The investors support it. The service providers support it. That ecosystem doesn't happen here. And they're like, listen, go away. Then what I did was I asked through a few friends I got to blog on non-newspaper sites, because in 2012, the newspaper blog was huge, right? The newspapers were huge. They were the big authority, especially in smaller cities. And so I got some friends with high traffic blogs to give me an opportunity to blog on their site, drove a lot of traffic to it, send it to the press and said, hey, look at all the tweets around this. They're like, okay, fine, we'll give you a blog. I wrote my first Startup of the Week column and I shared it with the founder. Now, what happens? You share a newspaper column with a founder saying, I covered you. This is not like some blog. This is the newspaper of the country, Post Media, right? They shared it with all their friends, family. That went viral. I got an email in like 3 or 4 days saying, hey, if you commit to writing this every week, we will give you a print column. Now you have this social proof exploded, right? You went from being a blog to a blog on the newspaper Startup of the Week to being a print column. And now every Monday, founders are lining up at 6 a.m. to pick the first copy of the newspaper and share the cuttings with their friends. Now, we had to go this route, Leah, because of two things. LinkedIn and all of this stuff wasn't prevalent at the time for startups, right? Like LinkedIn wasn't a platform of content. So now you're looking at third-party blogs like TechCrunch and everything else. And then the second thing is podcasting for startups wasn't even that prevalent. Like people weren't tuned in. So we said, we'll do meetups in person to build that in-person connection. And for online, we'll be on the local newspaper. And being on that local newspaper blog not only gave us social proof and backlinks. So imagine your fairly obscure site that nobody knows is getting every week one link from the newspaper, which is a domain authority of 100. Your SEO juice jumps up, your domain authority jumps up. And the newspaper print gives you so much social proof that became the first remnants of our community that over time transformed into traction and now conferences, and Uber CEO has come to our meetup, the CEO of Twilio, and so on. But that drove it in the early days. And as I looked back and started looking at other companies that went from obscure ideas to iconic brands, Boast is not an iconic brand. We're still a community-led company. There are a few key learnings that stepped out. Is learning or framework one is, hey, before you have anything, you got to figure out your ideal customer profile. How do you figure that out? The first thing is, you said understanding, like, do you love that audience? The passion for that audience is key, right? But part of that is also, how large is the market and is it growing? Is there a propensity to pay? Meaning, will they be able to pay you someday if they get value? And then the last one is there an ease of access? If you can't easily access, you may have the biggest market that you love that has a propensity to pay. Say, example, you love doctors, right? And it's a massive market, obviously. There are lots of doctors, healthcare is huge, and you love that market, you're passionate. But if there's no access, ease of access, you can't get a hold of them to pay you, then it's going to be futile. And that's what we found. We're like, manufacturing was huge at the time. The market we were in was Calgary in Canada. Oil and gas was the biggest market there, right? It drove everything. But we're like, hey, if they're not having conversations with us, then there's no ease of access. Maybe someday we'll tackle it, but let's start where you have the ease of access in addition, and the passion helped it. And the next framework was nailing down your ideal customer profile. And so meeting them regularly, talking to them, understanding their pains, going to the events they went to, participating in hackathons, helped us understand what are all the problems they were facing. Essentially, we were able to write down 100, 200 questions about the problems they face, so we could write content around them, like basically bring speakers. The third framework was figuring out their circle of influence. So who do they admire? Who do they follow? So those are the people you list down, and you can invite them as speakers to your podcast, your events, your meetups. Where do they frequent? Meaning, what are the blogs, magazines they read? What platforms are they prevalent on for your content distribution and partnerships? And who do they fund, or what tools they pay for? That last one gives you a list of people you can partner with, right? If they pay for Stripe, then you invite Stripe as a sponsor, kind of thing. It gives you a list of people you partner with to co-host. So now what happens is, when you host a meetup and a founder shows up, they're not showing up in the dark to meet strangers. They're like, it's my tribe. I follow this person's content, and now they're going to talk to me. And I know these 3 other founders, they're friends of friends. And oh my God, TechCrunch's journalist is there interviewing. I never hogged the limelight at the conferences. We would always invite, so TechCrunch comes to all our big conferences every year. VentureBeat, Forbes, the journalists from Forbes, they come, and every year we give them 2-3 slots to moderate sessions. I'm like, I don't want the stage. You'll actually, at the last traction that passed, we picked our super fans to MC each segment of the conference. And I may have done just one. one moderation, even not even an MC. So we enabled that. And I think that combination of one, figuring out how do you land on your ICP, two, how do you understand your ICP, three, how do you understand your ICP circle of influence, and then do two things right. Online content on one channel, like you did on LinkedIn, to get to 37,000 followers repeatedly. For us at the time, LinkedIn wasn't there, so we did Startup of the Week. I wrote it for 3 years, and from like 2012 to 2015. And when I stopped, that column also stopped, unfortunately. And then doing the meetups, in-person meetups, and that combination of things helped us build the audience, the subscriber base. And what's really interesting is it helped us not only get customers from it, it helped us build referral partnerships. Now, the first salespeople we hired, we talk about sales love, they fell into that DNA, right? The DNA of giving. So they didn't become, although their titles were salespeople, we actually called them business development, but they were actually glorified community managers. They would go out there and talk to people and understand their pain points and say, what do you need help with? And become this broker of resources. I can connect you. Oh, you're a startup, you need funding. I might connect you with an angel, a lawyer, banker, accountant. And when you ask them, hey, by the way, do you have a need for, I see you have a few developers. Are you tapping into government funding? Can I help you with these R&D tax credits? And they're like, of course, you've been great. The social proof of the speakers would invite gave us the brand rub. I love this word brand rub a lot, right? When you partner with somebody bigger than you, you get their like superpowers or their brand rub, and you win their credibility. So people started over time seeing bigger and bigger name speakers at our events. They're like, oh, these guys are good guys. These guys are good guys. And I kid you not that when we got to near 10 million in revenue, we didn't really have a marketing team, right? We went through 1-2 marketers over time, but not in a very sustainable long-term way. It was community through and through. Our partners came through our community. Some of our biggest customers came through our community. Like Jason Lemkin, I know through the community. He was a moderator at the first conference we hosted, or second conference we hosted, and that was in San Francisco. And I cold emailed him, and he came and he was interviewing Ryan Smith, Qualtrics founder, and he's like, how the hell did you even get this person? And we built a relationship over time. Today he's written the foreword in the book. So everything for me came through that community. And the ironic serendipitous thing is, in 2020, when the pandemic hit and things were really tough, we had to shut down a conference. Now we got like 55, 60 speakers or something confirmed. I didn't have the heart. Remember, I said I had PTSD from web-based conferencing solutions. So I'm like, I don't want to ever do a virtual summit for 50, 60 people. So I reach out to these 50, 60 speakers, and I said, would you do a 1-hour AMA with me live with our audience on Zoom? And everyone said yes. And the beauty of that was, rather than doing one virtual summit and blasting everyone with 60 speakers' names, it became every week at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday and 11 a.m. on a Thursday, you tune in, and there's a live webinar and with a speaker where you can listen to the conversation, but then you can also chime in with your thoughts and have an interactive conversations. We did that consistently actually for 2 years since the pandemic, and that took our audience from 30,000 plus subscribers to like over 100,000, because now speakers were sharing it, the videos were coming every week. Right? It's like the guy who tried to kill the golden goose, right? Who was laying the golden egg every day. It's like, what is the compound interest on laying one every day versus you chop it? And so I love that, doing smaller pieces of content more regularly. But what the interesting thing was, during the pandemic, there was a moment in time, I think it was like, I would like to say July or something, where they brought in-person events back. And we hosted a meetup, small meetup, couple hundred people. And through a community partner, I said, circle of influence, the people who you fund. And they recommended an investor from New York who we said, okay, join the panel. They came to the panel. They said to the founder of the main GP, or one of the main GPs of the fund, to contact the organizer of this event. He contacts me. The fund is Radiant Capital. And he says, hey, would you like to join our venture partner network? We'll recommend us deals that we'll invest in, and we'll give you carry. I'm like, listen, man, this community thing is something we do on the side. And imagine that was the labor of love of Boast. We never slammed Boast or plastered it all over. It was called Traction. The name Traction tied to the aspiration of our ideal customers that we loved, right? We built a community for them. And so I explained what we did. And he's like, what? You're selling $100 bills for $20? and you're profitable and you have no marketing team and this community is driving it. He's like, can we invest? Now, of course, Alex and I have like PTSD from also investor money, given like, all these failures we've seen. But then he explains that we're not traditional VC. And I'm like, what are you, PE? And he's like, no, we're not PE either. We're growth equity. So we'll invest in your company and let you take money off the table while letting you have enough skin in the game so you can de-risk in the short term and play the long game. It was the pandemic. I personally had never bought money home of any meaning. My wife was running the family. Alex was like, we we're all living not great. And so it was a great way to de-risk. But if you see what happened there, the community gave us our first customers, our partners, the social proof. Our community, the social proof from that community carried us to growth and made us wealthy. And so when I left the day-to-day of the company, I felt that was the only time I didn't have a community. And I went into like, I walked through the journey of going into depression, landing in Romania and all of this. It's like I was searching for my tribe. And I
Yeah.
felt like, when I finally realized that the tribe wasn't anywhere, it was here all while long. I said, as an homage to communities, I want to write this book and chronicle all the communities, big and small, because we're in this age of generative AI, right? Where everyone is talking AI, 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 everything. And what people don't realize is it's going to get old very quick, right? There was a time where we were saying .com company, and then we were saying cloud company, and we were saying social company, and we were saying mobile company. We don't say those things anymore. We were saying fintech company. The same way we won't say AI company anymore, right? Yesterday's innovation always becomes today's option and tomorrow's commodity. But if you build a community, you won't become a commodity. I wanted to ignite the conversation around the power of authentic human connections, which is the only truth behind the biggest enduring brands. So as I talked to like thousands of people and looked at so many brands, joined so many communities, rewatched all the traction content, the common path I found between every obscure idea that turned into an iconic brand or a global phenomenon, from Christ and Christianity to CrossFit, had this human to human connection, starting with I have an audience when people listen to me or buy my product. I bring those people together to interact with one another. It becomes a community. When the community comes together to create impact that transcends the purpose or that transcends the product or the profits of the company, a purpose much greater beyond the product or service or profits, it becomes a movement. And when that movement has unwavering faith in the purpose and the beliefs through sustained rituals over time, it becomes a cult or a religion. And so a lot of interesting learnings that I end up distilling into 13 rules to build iconic brands. And I talk a lot about this, right? Starting with your values and then figuring out your ideal customers, then figuring out the circle of influence, then how you design the content for them and how you build the channels. And then once you have that, one of the things I like to explore is, you and I are sound and sight, and we've been on this for 4 hours now. I feel like 2 hours you were on mine, and I think I'm more than an hour on yours. Like, how many minutes are we on?
Yeah, I think we are now at about 80 or 90 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. So how you build these relationships that are online even stronger is by bringing people together in person.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I had the benefit of doing them in tandem with the newspaper column and the meetups. But anytime you incorporate more than two senses, you build stronger connection. Where sound and sight, you bring taste, touch, smell,
Yeah.
and it just transcends and transcends, and it builds stronger and stronger. And that's why a lot of big events or communities bring people in person at least once a year, if not at some regular cadence.
I think this is a very clever way of thinking as well, also from the technical side that you said. I'm just going to add one thing. By the way, this is one of the episodes I don't think I've ever spoken this little in terms of like the overall time. So it's a compliment to you. This is good. I think you mentioned the word broker of resources, like from the salespeople before, which is also exactly what you should do as a company, right? Like you should become a broker of resources. It has to almost become uncomfortable about the content that you share, how good it is. If a competitor would be listening in on the call where you are, or like your meetup or anything that you actually host, and they could make money from this particular content that you just shared, then the content is right. This is how good it has to be. You have to share something genuinely that people did not learn or know from before. The secret sauce that you just described is actually how you run it, who you invite at the same time, who's standing next to you while they're listening to this. And this is what a lot of companies get wrong about community. They think this is a low-cost marketing channel to drive acquisition, when it is about connecting people. And at the same time, while they're chatting, they get hungry and then they get the food from your food stand that you have on the side. So you bring and connect the right people while they create also value to each other. And I really love this. So I absolutely love this framework.
It's also similar to what you've done, right? You're starting with a small niche. You said, it has to come from love. Has to come from somewhere you're passionate about. If you can't relate, it's hard to create. If you can't relate to somebody, it's hard to sustainably create over a long period of time. And starting small sometimes is better, because when you please 10 people, you can put more love into it. If you don't nail it, you can't scale it. It's very hard to start from scale.
And I think what is a testament to this particular power, let's say you host a meetup on a very specific topic for your specific industry that you want to conquer. Someone could take exactly the same content, the same speakers. They could host it in a building next to you 3 months later, and they have absolutely nobody showing up. And that's because you cannot see what's behind it. You don't see the love. You don't see the entire passion that went into it. So this is absolutely beautiful. I'm a big believer in community-led growth. This has been an absolute amazing pleasure. I know you're also at the end of your energy. Me too. And I think we earned the rest of our weekend to have. But I'm eternally grateful that you also shared your time and your energy to talk about this. And we made a commitment also on your podcast. So we're going to meet again at least in 6 months or in a year's time to see what we are actually starting to put on our own legs. And I hope that promise is also valid for my podcast here. And I cannot wait when that happens next. So, Lobo, how should the people get in contact with you? How do you want people to engage with you in any way other than buying your amazing book that's coming out soon?
Definitely. Follow me on LinkedIn, Lloyd with an E, Lloyed, last name Lobo. There's a funny story there. My mom put an E in there, and I'd get bullied a lot as a kid, saying, why do you have an E in your name? Or people mispronounce it. So I asked her several years ago, why do you have this in there? You made it so difficult for me. And she's like, I always wanted you to be a business person. And if I didn't put an E in there, it would be a typical English name that you couldn't trademark. But anyway, so there's Lloyd with an E. I shared that story so you can associate. E stands for entrepreneur, maybe. So Lloyd with an E in there, Lobo, on Instagram as well. Instagram is fairly new if you want to follow, but most of my content's on LinkedIn. And then the book is on FromGrassrootsToGreatness.com. The ebook is 99 cents. I just wanted everyone to have it. I could have given it away for free. I put it for 99 cents because I want the word to spread beyond my network. And one way for that word to spread is when people leave reviews. And if I give it away for free, your reviews are not verified. So the more reviews I get, the more the word spreads, the love of community.
No.
And that's why the ebook is going to be 99 cents for the longest time.
And if you subscribe to him, then you are officially Imp Lloyd. Okay, that was not a good joke, but it's one that you can use anyways. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Leah. This was a great pleasure.
Bam! Thank you so much for listening to the ProducTea with Leah. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leahtarin.com, which is leahtarin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.